What's up guys, welcome to FoundFlix. On this edition of Ending Explained, we'll be looking at the tension-fueled survival tale, It Comes at Night. And if you're wondering what the it is in the title, there is no it. No big reveal of a monster or anything like that. To me, the it is in fact fear itself, as the fear of the unknown is a huge driving force of the plot. This is a much more atmospheric, slow burn than the trailers let on, but is still a compelling story of two families struggling to survive in a deliberately vague apocalyptic scenario. There's a lot in the movie that's not explained and purposefully left open to interpretation, but based on what it does tell us, we can piece together a pretty clear picture of what is more than likely going on, even if the movie refuses to answer its most major questions. So I'll be looking at these questions like, what is the sickness, in addition to putting together the events that explain the ending. The story centers on a family doing their best to survive in a house deep in the woods amidst a sickness that has crumbled society into an apocalyptic scenario. There's no time frame of how long after the disease started that things take place, but it seems that it's been enough time for the family to learn how to avoid the disease, and they know enough to have their home tightly secured. Father Paul has very strict rules for his family's safety, and that is his highest priority, no matter what it takes to ensure the survival of his family. They keep the house on lockdown to protect themselves from the threats of the outside world, with only an ominous red door used to leave the house and go out into the outside. We know that some kind of sickness is spreading out there, and we are immediately presented with its deadly effects in the opening scene of the movie. Grandfather Bud has been infected and is nearly at death's door, body covered in sores and his eyes filled with blackness. His daughter Sarah is revealed in the room wearing a gas mask and gloves. She comforts Bud, telling him that it's okay to go and that he can stop fighting. Paul and his son Travis, also in masks and gloves, take Bud out into the woods, dumping his body into the ground and lighting it on fire. Sorry, Gramps. So we see that once someone is infected, the key to not becoming infected yourself is to avoid physical contact with the victim. By using masks and gloves, which we see the family utilize religiously, they are very diligent in avoiding contact, as the reality is they don't really know what exactly the sickness is they are facing. And Paul's general mentality is that it's better to be overly cautious, which we see he is very extreme about upholding. After disposing of Bud, Sarah is concerned about Travis witnessing the brutal end to his grandfather's suffering. And it does seem that Travis is going through a lot, as he is typically very quiet and is suffering from nightmares, usually involving the sickness, his grandfather, and the red door to outside in some way. To me, this all represents Travis's crippling fear of what unknown threats exist just outside that red door. No one knows exactly what is going on out there, and for Travis, his only world has been trapped inside his house. He even knows the real danger that is indeed right outside, as it literally just took his grandfather away from him. So perhaps all these are the reasons behind his frequent nightmares. As I mentioned, the movie doesn't ever make clear what exactly the disease is, but there is a painting that is heavily focused on that I think gives us a clue. Its friendly title, The Triumph of Death, featuring, well, death, lots of death, destruction, and plenty of skeletons. To me, it certainly looks like the end times. The movie spends a lot of time going over every detail of the painting, and I think this is to emphasize a parallel between the painting and the movie story. What we are seeing is certainly a version of the apocalypse, which I would say is a modern version of the plague. The sores seen on Bud and the black liquid coughed up by those infected definitely evoke the feeling of the Black Plague. One night, the family's bubble of security is burst when a man called Will breaks into their house, and understandably, Paul is worried that Will might be sick. So he ties him to a tree outside the house and waits. He mentions a very important detail, that it takes 24 hours for symptoms to show. So if after a day, Will doesn't show signs of infections, which would be blackness in the eyes and sores on the back of his hands, they know that there is no danger, at least from the sickness, that is. As Will has a family, and just like Paul, Will's priority over everything else is the survival of his family, which will cause everything to eventually fall apart between them. Paul questions Will about what is going on, and we get some of our only look at what is going on outside of the family's perspective, even though we can't trust 100% what Will is saying. According to him, a sickness broke out in the cities and everyone fled to survive. And that's pretty much all he says about it. Will says he's been staying with his brother and was forced to leave after they lost their water supply, and that his brother is dead. And here's another key detail that might clue us into how the sickness originally spread. through the water supply. In this scene, Paul interrogates Will, tempting him with the reward of water. And Will says he left his brothers due to losing their water supply. But no doubt there's lakes and streams all over the place, so why couldn't they get water from there? Because the water must be undrinkable, and if they do drink it, would get infected. We see that Paul's family has created a water purifying system with clearly marked dirty water containers, which are then boiled. So this indicates that it is possible to remove whatever makes the water dirty and then becomes safe to drink. So it must be the sickness that is within the water. Was the sickness some kind of bioweapon that was designed to take us out via our water supplies? There's no way to know for sure, but it certainly seems possible. We do know at least that the disease isn't airborne, as they don't wear their masks unless there's a potential for infection. At first, Paul is skeptical of Will's entire story. In fact, we later see that there are holes in Will's story, so Paul's unwillingness to trust him was in the end warranted. But Paul comes around to helping Will, deciding that it would be better to have safety in numbers. So they head out to bring back Will's family, wife Kim and young son Andrew. Along the way, they find themselves attacked by other survivors, opening fire on their truck. Will and Paul manage to get the upper hand and overtake their attackers, with one still left alive. Will suggests that they not kill him, but Paul isn't willing to take any risks whatsoever, and kills the final attacker. Will seems shaken up by this, and Paul asks if he knew the man, but Will insists that he did not, and that they merely could have asked him for information. It's possible to believe that Will was somehow connected to these men, as he is a proven liar, but I think it's more to illustrate just how zero tolerant Paul is to infection. They don't know if the men are infected or not, so rather than finding out, it's better to kill them. No questions there. It's all about ensuring their own survival, no matter the cost. So I don't think they're related to Will. And considering that Will continues to stick with Paul from here and joins up with his family, if the guys that Paul killed were friends of Will's, he wouldn't probably continue going along with him, you know? Or at least would try to kill Paul the first chance he got. But for a while, their families get along quite well, in fact, living and functioning together as a unit. They are willing to live by Paul's strict survival guidelines, including giving up their weapons, if it means some safety and a roof over their head. However, it ends up being short-lived, and eventually events are set in motion that cause their trust to collapse and winds up dooming both families. It begins when Grandpa's dog Stanley breaks free from his leash and runs off into the woods. Again, we never see it. There is no indication of there being a monster or anything like that whatsoever. But this scene does toy with that possibility. When they lose sight of Stanley, there are some very strange sounds that are heard, like those that might belong to a creature of some kind. But literally all we have are these sounds. This is designed to be vague, and even the director, when asked, played with the idea that maybe there was a monster, or was the dog just shot? So he's not going to give us any answers. Either way, if there is or is not a monster out there, that doesn't weigh too heavily on our story, as weird as that sounds. Travis continues to have frequent nightmares, and one night after having one, he discovers Andrew asleep on the floor of his grandfather's room. Travis doesn't think much of it and takes the boy back to his sleeping parents, putting him in bed. But he hears strange noises coming from downstairs, and when going through the same hallway that haunts his dreams, Travis sees the red door is slightly open. He doesn't go any further and alerts everyone to what is going on. It turns out that it was Stanley making the weird noises, who has returned home looking much worse for wear and most certainly infected. We don't know how Stanley got sick, but if the water is in fact polluted, it makes sense that the dog could have naively drank from a stream while out in the woods. They take care of the dog burning it, but now the question is raised. Who opened the door, and was anyone infected in the process? The family become at odds discussing what happened, and they think that Andrew might have been the one to open the door, but the boy just says he doesn't remember. Unsure of how to proceed, Paul suggests that each family take rations and stay in their respective rooms for a day, as anyone infected would be showing signs by then. Later, Travis crawls into the attic over Will's family's room, overhearing them talking about Andrew, and unfortunately it seems that the boy has indeed been infected, and he did actually open the door, making contact with Stanley. Travis reports what's going on to his father, who confronts Will outside of their door, wanting to see Andrew for himself. Will opens the door, greeting Paul with a gun in his face. Another lie, as supposedly Will agreed when they first arrived to give up all of their weapons, but obviously he held onto one in case things got out of hand, which they definitely have. Will insists that no one is sick here and forces Paul to remove his mask. But throughout the scene, Will keeps constantly telling Andrew to keep his eyes closed. It's pretty much certain that Andrew is sick, though we never actually see his eyes for ourselves. but that also means that both of his parents and Paul are now infected as well. Tensions are very high as Will says he just wants to take supplies and Paul's family will never see them again. Then something interesting happens when their conflict is taken outside. The strange music that had been exclusive to Travis's nightmares up to now spills over into this real life scene. This to me implies that what we are seeing play out in front of us is Travis's worst nightmare come to life. This is that fear of what lies just outside that have been giving Travis his nightmares, and now that very threat has come to fruition in the worst way imaginable. In a brutal confrontation, Paul shoots Will, who to be fair attacked him first, then shoots Andrew. Now the final survivor of their family, Kim says to go ahead and kill her too, and Paul obliges. It's already a pretty heart-wrenching scene, but it's made even worse as we realize now that Paul's entire family is also sick, since Will's family was infected and they made contact with them. Travis is actually the first to get sick as he got infected that night he helped Andrew back into his parents' bed, since Andrew was infected by Stanley at the time. Based on the timing, this had to be where Travis got sick too, as if it was from any earlier, he would have been showing symptoms earlier as well. And in a scene mirroring Bud's scene in the beginning, Sarah stands over a very sick-looking Travis and tells him he can stop fighting and to let go. But unlike the beginning, this time Sarah isn't wearing a gas mask as she is already infected, and we can also see this due to the blackness in her eyes. And Travis fades away, succumbing to his sickness. In our utterly hopeless final scene, Sarah joins Paul at the kitchen table where they silently wait for their own impending deaths. Yeah, the ending is about as miserable as it gets. Literally no one survives. The story is about what happens to people in an apocalyptic survival scenario, and in the end, it became about trust. Both Will and Paul will do anything to save their families, but it pushes them too far. Will is willing to lie to protect his family, and Paul is so hell-bent on abiding by his strict survival rules, and their overwhelming desire to save their families in the end caused them all to die. Once trust broke down between the families, there was no longer a possibility for survival. That'll do it for my ending explained on It Comes at Night. What did you guys think of the movie? And what other theories do you have on what is going on? Also, if you have any other movie or TV show endings you want me to explain, let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching FoundFlix. See you next time.